don't think there's any delegates, correct? And then we'll move on to the Q&A. So, as chair of the Timberlane Regional School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom or telephonically. Instructions have also been provided on the website of the board at timberlane.net/Zoom TRSB. If anybody has a problem, please call 382-6541, extension 3955. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Kat, can you take the vote? Roll call, please.
Ryan Boyle.
I am here. I'm alone in the room, and there are other family members present in the household.
Lee Doobie.
I am here. I'm alone in my home office.
Kim Farah.
I'm here. I'm alone in the room. There are other members of my family in the house.
Barbara Kushka.
I'm present and alone in the residence.
Sheila Lowe's.
I am here and alone in the residence.
Sarah Makamar.
I am here. I am alone in the room, but there are other members of my family in the house.
Sean O'Neill.
I'm here and alone in my office.
Kristen Savage.
I'm present with other members of my family in the house.
Jennifer Silva.
I'm present, alone in the room with other household members.
Present with other members of my family in the house.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, if you could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So that being said, I'd like to welcome everybody. I know we have close to 300 participants already to the Q&A that regarding the school opening plan for the district. Initially, I'm going to turn it over to district administrators for a short summary. Then we'll talk a little bit about some updates to the plan, including what the metrics are that we're looking at for moving from remote to blended to full 100% participation. And then we will be taking questions and answers, or questions in real time. Kristen Savage and I will try to get as many questions, and we will ask the staff those questions. So this meeting it's a board meeting, but it's really, we're turning it over to the administrative staff who've been working tirelessly to try to answer the questions that have been coming in, which we fully appreciate the number of questions, and they're working very, very long hours to try to get these. I will plan to end this session about 9 o'clock. We will capture questions that haven't been answered, and everybody probably had an email earlier today that gives you the link to the Q&A page, and that will be updated over the course of the as we move forward and finalize plans. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Cochran and Mrs. Allaire.
Thank you, Dr. Farah. Good evening, folks in the audience. We have received over 500 questions for the session this evening, and staff have been working diligently to try and answer as many as we can and post those on the district website. And we'll continue to do that as the questions come in So we'll have even more of them answered with a written answer that you can reply to. We'll begin to answer the questions shortly, but we wanted to clarify a couple of things for you. Sandy, did you want to take over?
Sure. So our current plan does have 3 different flexible options in it. Currently, right now, our plan does not provide for 100% full return to school buildings if we are abiding to CDC guidance, which is what we have committed to with regards to social distancing. So right now, we are looking at the blended cohort hybrid model or a full remote model as the 2 options that we are actively considering. Our TRSD in-person task force has developed metrics for determining when the district will move from one cohort, from the cohort model to full remote learning for all if necessary. And we're going to share that momentarily with this group. We are very much looking forward to working with our teachers and paras in meetings that are scheduled to begin next Monday to clarify and problem solve around some questions that we need to address relative to collective bargaining agreements. So I'm going to turn it over briefly to Lucy Kanotis, who's our Director of Elementary Curriculum, who's going to speak a little bit more to our plans.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Our proposed plan includes a cohort-based blended instructional model. The implementation of a cohort model would allow students to attend school in person at a reduced capacity. Students would be required to meet social distancing and CDC guidelines. In this cohort model, students attend online remotely for 3 days in the week and in-person instruction for 2 days. In a fully remote model, students participate and interact with their courses online 5 days a week. The schedule for a cohort model will start and end at the same time, regardless of which cohort students are scheduled in for all days of the week, meaning that when students are in person and when students are working remotely, their schedules will be the same all 5 days. When students are scheduled, there is some flexibility in that schedule in order to add in breaks, in order to add in transitions that we know that we're going to need both in person and when we are working through remote learning. The schedule for fully remote will align with a typical school day schedule, but also have some flexible start and end times for instruction. Those schedules will be published for families. And what we're working on now is making sure that we're able to integrate all the necessary components of the day and allow for, as I said, some of those transition and breaks to happen as well. 100% remote learning will be made available to those students and families who want it. We will be sending out a parent request to parents to commit for the first semester or the first trimester at the elementary and middle school level. Later on this week, those commitments will help us make adjustments to classes and staff as necessary and make sure that students in remote learning can participate fully.
Great, thank you, Lucy. So an added note to the cohort model and remote learning, fully remote learning. So we are providing families with an opportunity to opt into the fully remote model. But should we be in a blended cohort model as a district, we are going to work actively to match up our faculty who will be teaching remotely to provide remote schedules as much as possible to meet the requests that are coming from our families. High school students who are selecting full remote learning, however, may not have access to the full Timberlane program of studies or to all of the courses that are currently built into their schedules that they have now. Those schedules were developed in the spring when we had a plan to return, full in-person, not on this hybrid or full remote model. So our admin team is actively working now. Our counselors will work actively to make every attempt to accommodate student needs. However, depending on course availability, we may be working with students to try to augment their schedules for certain classes that they may need through VLACs or other options that we have available. Conversely, students who are selecting the hybrid cohort model to come into the district plan, if we're able to be in that situation, may be required to take select courses that are offered through remote-only instruction. So in some cases, if we have a teacher who is teaching remotely, or the vast majority of students enrolled in a course signed up for remote instruction, we may look at offering remote-only sections of isolated courses that may be electives or singletons, we often call them at the high school. So in these situations, hybrid cohort students, when they are in person in the buildings, will follow their normal schedule, but will attend a class in a space that's made available at the high school with a proctor and sign into a remote classroom if necessary. Those situations are very complex. They're fluctuating as we are getting data regarding requests from our families, the needs of our staff. And as I said, we are working actively to try to meet all requests and provide the best possible experience for all students. But it's going to be a very complex task that we'll work on actively with our counselors. So from there, what we'd like to do now is take you to, I'm gonna hopefully share my screen to share the district website and reference the Q&A page. So if you bear with me, I'm going to try to pick up my screen. So earlier today, we posted a link to an FAQ page, which is on the right side of our district website. And just below that, you'll see a link to the plan. But I'm going to click on the link for the FAQ page. So we did receive over 500 questions, and they continue to come in. We actively made an attempt to answer as many of the common questions as possible through an FAQ page. So the plan is here, the FAQs are found below. But part of that process was also to identify the metrics that we will use as a district for determining when we are able to transition from one instructional model to another. So meaning if we are able to start in a blended hybrid cohort model, at what point might the district consider going to a full remote model if conditions in our community change? And then on the opposite side of that, if we are in a full remote model, at what point might we be able to move back into a blended cohort model and ultimately back to a full return to our buildings? So this document that I'm about to share with you that was posted was developed through our in-person task force this morning. So our task forces continue to meet. Our remote-only task force met on Monday. Our in-person group met this morning. Part of our work this morning for the in-person group or in-school group was to divide into different groups, and we had one group working on this document. That group was comprised of medical professionals, our school nurses. We had some parents in there as well who looked at current recommendations based on from the CDC, also the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, the Harvard Global Health Institute, and other resources to develop these metrics. And our other groups worked on some other topics relative to movement in school buildings, bathroom usage, and protocols around that. So I'm going to allow Dr. Cochran and Dr. Farah to speak to this a little bit. They were both part of that working group in our task force this morning. So.
Hi. I want to thank the nurses who were involved in today's meeting with Dr. Farah and I. Their input and ideas and knowledge and professionalism were absolutely required and essential to this. So if we look at at what we're trying to do is come up with metrics that would allow us to determine when to change models from where we are. And the changes might be to go to fully remote, or at some point in time, it may be able to bring all students back in a normal model. Unfortunately, at this point in time, the Department of Health and Human Services is working on their version of the metrics. And we also have CDC guidance. In the absence of the information yet from Department of Health and Human Services, which we're told is forthcoming, we attempted to try and put together some metrics that made sense to us, leaning very heavily on the expertise of the nurses in terms of when we would go from the hybrid and remote to a full remote, and when we would go to a all in back in school. Dr. Farah, did you want to take us through the first piece?
Sure. Hang on one second. I'm just scrolling through questions. I'm seeing questions come in. So there are really three stages here. You're either 100% return to school, blended, which is that cohort model that we've been talking about, or remote. So, and you can leave it right there. I think that's good on the screen, at least for me. I can see all three of those, and I think that's important for people. So the 100% return right now would not be possible based on the fact that we're following CDC guidance. So the only time we would get all the students back in school would be if all of a sudden coronavirus went away or the CDC said we have a medicine or something. So we're really not looking at that option right now. And in order to do that, even if the CDC changed their guidance, we would still want to be at a low % of the population in Rockingham County that would be having active cases. So those metrics are 100% return to school. Right now, we're kind of in between those, so I don't really think we need to speak to that. But as we scroll down, if you scroll up just a little bit more down, what's going to trigger if we go to a completely remote model? Now, for students that are 100% remote, that their parents have said, I want to be remote for whatever, we're going to ask you to commit to either a quarter or a trimester, and you will stay remote, regardless of what happens with these switching back and forth between the people that are cohorts and the people that may have to go remote. So if you're in a cohort and one of these things happens, this will trigger everybody to go remote, okay? So if we get additional guidance from Department of Health and Human Services that kind of tells us when to do that, or if we find that 1% of students or staff in a school, which is about 1 student for every 5 classrooms, has a positive case of COVID, then that school will go remote. And then once that school has been closed, it will have to be reevaluated to reopen. People are probably not aware of this, but every positive test in New Hampshire has contact tracing done by the State Department of Health and Human Services. So we won't be responsible for that. We'll be responsible for reporting, and then they will be tracing it, and that will give us an idea as to whether or not we should be looking at other possible school closures, depending on the tracing. So that's one case where you'd go from blended to fully remote with everybody. Or if the active cases in Rockingham reach greater than 0.01% of the population. Right now, if you look at the very bottom of the screen, what we know is there are about 0.033% of the total population in Rockingham has active cases. So we are looking at, if we look at a 0.1% threshold, and somebody, I'm sure will ask where that came from, because I would. We try to consider the fact that we would still be well at a very, very small population, but that would indicate that we were trending up, so that we're going from 0.033 up to 0.1. If we start to see that trending, Brian?
Yeah, no, just if you finish your sentence, I was just going to chime in.
Then that would be a closure. And then the other thing that would trigger a closure completely of the district would be if the state comes down and says all districts need to go to remote learning. So I'm hoping this clarifies what the metrics are. Brian, did you want to pop in?
Yeah, if you think back to March and April, and we heard a lot of talk about flattening the curve, right? Then if you think of where our levels are now, and if they continue to go up to basically 3 times what they are now, that would trigger us taking some action to flatten that curve by going fully remote. So if you think of why we went in fully remote in the spring, it was to flatten the growth, the exponential growth of that curve. And so what we're going to do is monitor a lot of data, but especially look at what's happening in Rockingham County and associated areas, because people come into and out of the school from different places. And if we see an uptick like that, that would indicate to us that we are approaching a significant peak, right? In other words, the curve is starting to rise significantly and noticeably. We would take action to go back to fully remote mode. Now, our preference would be to work hand in hand with the Department of Health and Human Services on this, and we expect that that will be there. But we want to show the sort of metrics that we're looking for that will allow us to make appropriate and timely decisions rather than get behind the curve, if that makes sense.
I hope so, and there are already some questions coming in on this, and I just want to answer them. There's a question that says, aren't we at an extremely low rate? Yes, we are. We're at 0.03 or whatever that rate is. We've taken a look with the professionals that were in this working group, because we don't have guidance yet, and said, our guess is that the rate in New Hampshire will go up when students return to school. You're now having more students. And so we looked at what the current rate is and said, what seems to be a reasonable rate? So that's where that 0.1% came up with. We don't have guidance. No one has that sort of guidance that they can provide. We felt this was a very conservative amount, but what it would show is that you were trending upward from the 0.03 up to towards 0.1. So that's where that number came from. It seems low, but because we know this virus transmits so easily, we didn't feel comfortable increasing that threshold beyond that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Farah and Dr. Cochran. I'm going to just kind of back up a little bit in here because we do have some FAQs. Just to reference in general, this document is up here. We will continue to update it, but I know that there have been some common questions coming in with regard to the start and end times of school for both in-person and remote. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes to address that before we move on to some of the questions that are coming in. So right now, we have had a remote task force that's been meeting for the past several weeks that has developed a tentative schedule for remote-only instruction. That model was designed with a lot of input and feedback that we received from parents, speaking to a desire to not start school prior to 9 a.m. So when I say not start school, it's not that things wouldn't be happening prior to 9, but that the delivery of academic content on a schedule would start roughly 9 a.m. During the day, and we would continue on a set schedule throughout the remainder of the day with opportunities for individualized small group work, for the delivery of remote services, for small cohorts to meet in small groups, but also to be really mindful of best practices and recommendations around screen time for children. So really that group spoke to the fact that remote instruction doesn't necessarily imply online learning 100% of the time during a set schedule. So while we intend to provide a schedule, teachers will have the flexibility to have asynchronous meetings with their students for class meetings at the elementary level, for the delivery of new content and skills, for practice, Q&A sessions, for extra help, but that there may be times when teachers are sending students off to work independently on tasks and then to check back in So the schedule has been designed with some flexibility in it to provide options for all of those different types of instruction. So right now we are looking at that schedule because as we have started to transition from talking about remote only, so fully remote, that schedule, to the hybrid cohort model, which includes remote instruction, but also in-person learning, we are becoming aware of potential issues that may arise around flexible scheduling for students who may need to move in and out of models. So I mentioned earlier that we may have some classes that are required to be remote only. So if students are in person in a hybrid model and taking a remote only class, we need to make sure that our schedules align. If we have students who are attending our CTE programs at Salem and Pinkerton, our high school team has been working actively with those schools to get the most recent updated information on their schedules to make sure that whatever we put in place will allow our students to attend and participate fully in those programs should they choose to do so. So for that reason, we are actively looking at the remote 2.0 schedule that had a later start for academic time and looking to make some adjustments to ensure that we have a fluid transition between the models for all of the reasons I just mentioned. That being said, the cohort model, the blended approach where students are in person 2 days a week and remote the remainder of the week, that schedule will operate on a normal daily schedule. So at the high school and middle school, they start, the high school begins the morning at 7:20. They go until 2:10 in the afternoon. Middle school is right around 7:30. They go until 2:15 or 2:20. Our elementary schools start closer to 8:30, depending on the building. Plan is for those schedules will remain the way they look now. Flexibility, but that is our plan. So we are not running the hybrid blended cohort model on a 2-hour delay schedule. I know that that was perhaps a common understanding after our presentation last week, and that is not our plan currently. I want to make that clear that students will arrive when they're in buildings as a normal day, as they did prior to March 13th when we went out. So that was one common question we wanted to address. CTE is another question. I know that we have Mr. Woodworth on here. I just mentioned CTE briefly, but Mr. Woodworth, do you want to speak at all to CTE and how we are handling that?
Mr. Woodward.
Don, are you able to jump in about CTE?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
In the cohort model, our CTE schedules align pretty well with the schools that we're sending to Salem and to Pinkerton. In a remote situation, we will have more challenges. When there are conflicts with scheduling, counselors will work with the students, set priorities, and make decisions about, courses that might have to be taken either another time, another semester, another year even. However, the programs that we've been accessing are running full bore, so we'll be able to have our students participate. Transportation will have to be arranged. Depending on the mode we're in, that might be a little different. We have a couple of times a day that we're sending students there. So if they're going in a remote world, we'll probably have to get them to come to the high school to take a bus to get over to Salem, for instance. So there are a couple of things there that once we know what we're doing, we'll get more specific about and make sure everybody has their plan down, and we can arrange transportation where we need to. Is there more that you need to know there? Yeah.
No, thank you, Don. I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. I'm going to kind of stop sharing. I know we have some active questions coming in. We can return to the FAQ questions as well, but we can start answering some of the live questions as they're coming in, Dr. Farrow, if you'd like.
Okay, yes, I'll start moving forward into some of these questions. To be fair, let me see. I'm gonna. So here's a question that came in, is that children with IEPs need extra attention. What will be their options?
So I know we have Susan Rossico on this call. Susan, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, thank you. So there are many options. We have changed our program since March. We experimented with a few options for individualized attention for students in our ESY program, and specifically looking at skill development and targeted in that area. We had received a lot of positive feedback from families in the changes that we made. In addition to that, the changes that we are also looking at are looking at some new platforms that provide a higher level of privacy for our students and our therapists, so that they're able to provide this attention as well. There is within our process for the IEPs as well as the 504s to have a meeting. So the person who asked that question, it's a great question, but I think that really your team, and you're an important member of that team, know your child best. And so if there are things that we can improve upon in terms of individualizing what your child might need, I would encourage you to reach out to the case managers and have a meeting to really look at what would be specific to your child.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. If we are at an extremely low rate, which has been trending like this for quite some time, why aren't we looking at being fully in school? CDC and AAP states 3 to 6 feet distance is applicable. If kids are masked 3 feet apart, why not look into plexiglass to be put up and aim for the fully in-school model for those that want it? I think there's a discrepancy between CDC and AAP, is my understanding correct? That CDC is looking at 6 feet apart. Is that, Mrs. Allaire, did you want to answer that question?
Yeah, that's accurate. So CDC does still recommend 6 feet, whereas the American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend 3 to 6. Mr. Paradis, our facilities director, will be joining us in a little bit, and we could potentially come back to the question of plexiglass. That being said, many of our classrooms, when we were measuring them, looking at our ability to meet those guidelines, whether they be 6 feet or 3 to 6 feet, we're looking at a variety of furniture models. So I know a common assumption might be that we're equipped with desks that we are able to put in rows with either chairs or seating that's attached. But in reality, at all of our different schools, we have a variety of flexible seating options in place in our classrooms that range from 5-foot rectangular tables that seat 2 students at them, spaced out in a room, to flexible desks where students can stand and be at a desk in the corner of the room, combined with round tables, combined with student desks. So students have options for seating. So when we're talking about plexiglass and separating students out in that manner, so it's not that it's impossible, but it's more complex than purchasing plexiglass dividers that we set up around student desks. And I know that there are a variety out there, that some are actually plexiglass, others are forms of plastic. We've talked with our facilities director about availability, and I don't want to speak to that right now because Gary has looked much more extensively into cost and availability of what is out there and what we would need in our buildings. But that being said, getting back to the CDC and the AAP, we made a decision as a district to abide by CDC. And we've put in place an approach to layer different practices with regard to risk mitigation to provide an optimal environment to prioritize health and safety. So, we are aware of the AAP guidelines. Those have come up in our conversations in our task forces. It's certainly something we've discussed, but currently we are looking at the CDC, which does still require 6 feet.
So Sandy, I am on. This is Gary.
Oh, thank you, Gary. I wasn't sure if you had made it yet. Yep.
Yeah, I'm here. I made it. Yeah, I did look into the plexiglass. We've looked into, it's kind of like a U-shaped scenario with cardboard, and in a clear plastic, you know, with a cardboard frame instead of, which is a little cheaper. Lead times, as you were talking about, right now are anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. I don't have guidance on what we were doing, so I don't want to order thousands of these for all the desks unless we know what we're doing. If we're doing the 6 feet, obviously less desks, less dividers. If we're going fully remote, you know, why are we, my opinion is, why are we spending the money? But until I get guidance on which scenario we're taking, I don't know what we're going to do yet. Until we have guidance, I just don't know what we can do.
Okay, there are several questions, so let me move on. There's also some concern with plexiglass that it may not be as effective as you would think because of the way the airborne transmission works. So that was another topic that came up in the task force meetings.
And
There are a couple questions here as to how many people on the parent survey said that their child wanted to go remote totally, and there seemed to be some confusion that there was a cutoff of, say, 30% had to go remote before we moved to the hybrid model or blended model. That's not the case. We will be looking at that approach, and without giving specifics, it's between 20 and 25% of parents, I think. Sandy, I think it would be fair to say would be looking at remote.
Yeah, those responses are still coming in. Well, actually, I think they just closed very recently. But as of this morning, yes, that's roughly where we were at when we looked at it.
Okay, moving on. So early years, K through 2, remote learning, will it be more interactive than the spring?
Lucy, do you want to speak to that?
Sorry, I got a little lost in questions. Yeah, so I can speak to the question I was just going to answer too. The elementary model, and I know that people want a definitive schedule, and that is coming, as Sandy mentioned. We're sort of playing with, you know, not starting. We are asked to start at 9, but fitting in everything that we need to fit in, it has been a challenge because we don't want kids to sit on a computer with back-to-back lessons. We have scheduled, though, sections of time, we'll call them, where dedicated instruction will be delivered. One section is through a morning meeting for social emotional work and community building. Another section would be for math, for reading, for writing, integrating in science and social studies. And in addition to those lessons, direct instruction lessons each day, there's a time built in after that lesson that the teacher will flexibly move between a whole class, maybe staying on a Zoom for some question and answers. Obviously, this is going to be different age appropriately, depending on grade level. The teacher might schedule some small group work to take some students to do specific skills. The student might schedule, the teacher might schedule some independent work, but that hour after each lesson is for practice, for support, for intervention, for follow-up. So we are looking at a much more structured and as similar to what happens in school as possible, knowing that we're working in a completely different environment.
Questions. Can we consider the hybrid cohorts by neighborhood so parents can help those around them? Also, most neighborhood kids have already been playing together.
Yeah, so certainly.
You may not be able to answer that question, but
yeah,
it's a good thought. I mean,
it's a good thought. I can tell you, we've looked at it through a variety of different parameters. One of them was bus routes. So if we're thinking about neighborhood kids being able to be in cohorts, I think we're looking at it through a lens of busing as well. That being said, you know, it's very complex. We're making an effort to ensure that families who have children across the district in different levels, so perhaps an elementary child, a middle school child, and or a high school child in our buildings, we're looking to provide options for those families to have their students in the same cohort for transportation purposes, for scheduling purposes. That being said, we also know that some families have requested the opposite, have requested their children to be on opposite cohorts to allow for the parents, if they are home, to be present with both children. So, we're trying to meet all requests as they come in, but right now we're attempting to look at it to put family members on common cohorts across the district. So.
Okay, thank you. When will we know if 100% remote students can participate in sports, and also will homeschool students be able to participate in sports?
Yeah, Angelo is on this call, I believe, so.
In terms of NHIA rulings, the NHIA would respect districts' wishes as far as remote students go, and as far as homeschool students go, they are always eligible and have been eligible to participate in our sports programs.
I think it's important to note that all the sports that are offered in the state right now currently are anticipated running, but they do become local decisions. School to school has to determine which sports they're going to actually be able to run. So a lot of that has to do with facility, transportation issues that have to be figured out at a local, one school at a time.
Okay, another question is Timberlane working with any community partners to offer programming on the remote days for families who choose the hybrid approach?
We could talk a little bit to that. I know that historically we've been having several students each year take a portion of their courses through VLAX, and while that's open to them, that's a as available resource. And recently, that has been heavily used by many schools across the state. Dr. Cochran told us a little bit today about schools that made their entire school year for all students VLAX. So imagine the impact of that. He said that perhaps over 20% of the students in the state may be taking VLAX courses. I've heard from other principals that there are some courses that are already filled, and there are some limited resources in terms of their ability to add more sections of some courses. So I would say that people that are thinking about taking courses through VLAX would want to enroll as quickly as possible while there are still courses available. But when you go remote, you run a risk of not being able to take all the courses that you initially enrolled in. If we're doing a blended delivery like we are with the cohorts, and the students opt out of that and they go remote, we'll be scrambling to try to meet their academic plan, with fidelity.
Let me clarify Don's comment about VLAX. Originally, the commissioner was very supportive of trying to ramp up VLAX to give it more capacity. And I'm not going to question his motives for that. I'm sure they were all in the best interest of serving students. But as of Thursday of last week, there was an emergency meeting of superintendents with the Department of Education and with Steve Kozakowski, the head of VLAX, basically saying that while they offered to open their doors, some districts had in fact chosen to try and register all their students, as Mr. Woodworth indicated. And the reality was it wasn't doable. And so the meeting was basically a very strong pushback to say that's not the role of VLAX. Districts will not be registering, and that the requests that they had would have amounted to roughly 25% of all high school students in the state, which clearly don't have nearly the capacity to do. But so that is not where entire districts are happening at this point in time for high school. But the sooner, if you have interest in a VLAX course, you get a hold of the high school and or middle school and get enrolled, the better the chances.
Yeah, students enroll themselves. The parents will enroll the students directly with VLAX. We will work with the families to make sure they understand what the credit transfer is. If you take a course there, they're leveled like ours are leveled, and we will honor their leveling. But we also have an opportunity to take a look at courses that we have not previously accepted, and our deans will analyze the competencies of those courses compared to ours and make sure we transfer the credit appropriately when that course is completed. So there's a process to go through at the school, but it's a direct contact with VLAX from the family that is enrolling their student there. So you might want to get on that quickly if that's definitely the road you're going to take.
And VLAX has changed the regulations. Even if a parent decided full-time with no courses in Timberlane, you can still keep your Timberlane enrollment, keep your options open, and it would not lower our annual daily membership, which basically is the number that triggers our grant funding for the next year. So anybody who is attending, it's preferable from a district perspective for them to stay registered, even if they were taking all of their courses from VLAX.
Yeah, in the past, that wasn't possible. Students would actually, if they went to school at VLAX full-time, they would become VLAX students. It would be like a transfer to another school. But it's an exception this year, and it's a very important distinction so that students can make that decision and not risk, their affiliation with the high school. They would still be able to participate in co-curriculars and other things like that.
Another question, if we do the hybrid, will the remote days be with the teacher live?
So I think that the answer is slightly different depending on the level that question is reflective of. At the elementary level, a classroom teacher will move from remote to in-person with his or her class for the whole week.
Yeah, and at the secondary model, the cohorts are divided somewhat differently at the secondary model due to our scheduling. So classes at the secondary model, middle and high school, would be split approximately by 50%. So, because students change classes throughout the day, it won't be a perfect 50% in every class, but we'll do our best to make that happen. But that being said, in a freshman English class, for example, at the high school, that group of 9th graders would be split. Cohort 1 would be in person with their teacher Monday, Tuesday. Cohort 2 would be required for attendance purposes, kind of a minimum standard. Our proposal is that those students would sign in for attendance and for any kind of general updates to the class. And we hope to provide flexibility to teachers to deliver anything remotely to that cohort who is at home, or to assign work that they would be working on. Wednesdays, that group ideally will be all together remotely, both cohorts. And then at the tail end of the week, Thursday, Friday, cohort 2, that was at home at the start of the week, would be in person with that teacher. So the balance of students in that class would be in person. So for 4 days, the class would be split 50-50, with half being in person and half being at home. And that would rotate between the two cohort attendance days, if you will. And they would all be have an opportunity to be together remotely on that flex day on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Another question came in. Young children learn through play-based hands-on activities. What are going to be the protocols for sharing procedures? Are the children going to be allowed to interact with each other and participate on the playground with sensory tables? And if they are not, how are the teachers going to be able to engage the students?
So, that's something we're actively working on, protocols. And so we have our, administrative team at the elementary level having these conversations actively. Things like recess, playtime, outside. Those are conversations we have to have with regard to mask wearing. But right now, if we're abiding by CDC guidelines, we're looking at, in all likelihood, limiting contact and sterilizing belongings, having individual student access to certain things in the room and making sure that we can sterilize them in between. So it's going to be challenging with regard to play-based, but we're confident that we can make it work with protocols in place. Lucy, I don't know if you have anything else to add based on your discussions with the elementary team, but.
Yeah, I was just gonna say pretty much what you said. Obviously our teachers are still out on summer vacation. We need to engage our teachers in that conversation, the people who know the 3s and 4s and 5s best, in order to follow CDC guidance, but also to be able to interact with students. It is likely that we're not gonna have 5 students standing around a sand table at the same time, right? But our intent is to still be able to develop those skills in students. And so working together, teachers and administrators, to develop the program changes, both in person and for our 4-year-olds or kindergartners when they're remote. That is something that we are working on right now.
Okay, thank you. Another question, if fully remote, can specials be optional?
So, again, we have a different proposed schedule for our specials. I don't know, Lucy, if you want to speak a little bit to the elementary level, and I can address secondary, but.
Sure. So in either model, remote or cohort, we are looking to have unified arts teachers who work on a 2-week rotation. I know part of the challenge in the spring was having, the normal in-school rotation of 5 different UAs, 5 different specials throughout a week, and having all of those classes, all of those lessons to do. By moving to this model of 1 unified art working for 2 full weeks, we think that we can implement more project-based learning, that we can integrate the arts and the UAs with our elementary curriculum. And we plan to do that. That said, our UAs are a graded course. But certainly, we need to work with families in order to accommodate any specific needs that a family has.
There are 2 other aspects. One, unified arts courses are required by the minimum standards for public school approval in the state of New Hampshire. And the other thing is that teachers collective bargaining agreements require planning time and lunch breaks, and unified arts classes are necessary for us to meet those needs and to give the classroom teacher the break that they need to work on planning and preparation as well.
Yep, and I was just going to add that at the secondary level, at the high school, our unified arts are, students sign up for those through the scheduling process. So they elect to sign up for a unified arts course, whether that be in music or art, family consumer science, technology, etc. At the middle school, we have our students scheduled into unified arts on a rotating basis throughout the year. So it's a different approach than what happens typically when we're in full session, normal attendance procedures with our specials or unified arts at the elementary level. But students typically have 2 UAs at the middle level at one time. This is Kelker. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Thanks, Cindy. What you said is accurate.
Yeah.
They rotate through those 2, and those are some of our, our students look forward to those classes, and our teachers did a great job delivering them remotely. So I anticipate them continuing at the middle school with no change.
Okay, thank you. Will we have a detailed remote learning schedule before we're asked to commit to remote learning schedule? This is coming in from a pre-K and second grade parent.
Well, we,
So,
okay,
all right, go ahead, Don.
we have drafted a schedule. We want to, try to make sure that it's something that can work in all aspects for elementary, middle, and high. But that's something that we can put together pretty quickly. It'd probably be a bit different from the blended or the remote, the cohort model. We want to build in office time, contact time, opportunities for students to touch base with teachers at the beginning and end of the day. So we probably have a different start time to honor that, and try to make sure that the amount of continuous time in front of a computer is decreased, while not sacrificing significant instruction or personal attention.
Okay, and at the lower levels, I think you do have didn't we put out a schedule in the plan? Like an approximate schedule for those students?
We do have a schedule, and part of the feedback from yesterday's task force and today kind of put that aside to go back and dig into this week. Originally, there was a schedule that out of feedback, we started at 9 o'clock. Based on some new feedback, we're considering moving that to 8:30. So no matter what mode we're in, no matter whether you're in person or remote, we might be starting elementary students at 8:30, so it's not confusing between the models. So, I think we've heard, or I've heard, that is a priority. We spoke about it just late this afternoon again. We certainly can revisit that again tomorrow and hopefully be able to get that out by the end of the week before a real commitment letter comes out to families.
It seemed that in all models, our teachers worked the same hours. So it was really just a matter of timing up when we wanted to begin classes and end classes to be fair to all students. I know that, for instance, at the high school, we'll have students that are remote that are coming back in that model to participate in co-curricular activities. And so we wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to be able to make that transition. And at the beginning of the school day, we feel like there's going to be a need, to get teachers available to either respond to individual parent or teacher concerns, or administrative preparation pieces. We want to make sure that we have them ready to go each day, and have the parents and the students being served with some individual attention beyond the classroom time.
Thank you. Another question, as schools across the US begin to open, we're seeing more data emerge that indicates younger children are spreading COVID. During the last board meeting, a question was asked regarding young children wearing masks. The CDC recommends all people 2 years of age or older wear masks when around people who don't live in your household. And the use of masks is particularly important in settings where people are close to each other. Masks must be required to protect students and staff. So how will this be enforced by the district? And what will be the protocol for mask breaks for both students and staff?
One of the questions is really a more of a legal question, and we'll be working with legal counsel on that. What do you do if a student consistently displays behavior that may put others at risk? And that's an issue that we're going to have to go through legal for. We've already spoken to our attorney about it, and he and I are generating a list of topics to go with the collective bargaining about such policies. There will be some other policies that we have to tweak as well. The School Boards Association has adapted a few policies that we have to update at an upcoming board meeting, but that's essentially policy procedures and basically getting legal clarity.
I know at the high school level, we really have to make a great attempt to have a culture change. We need people to recognize that their behaviors are important, not just for their own health, but for everyone else's. And we need to be able to work together, to mitigate the issue. So if it means that we have to work in some breaks for students during class to leave, go out the door, get some fresh air, come back, those are the types of things we can do proactively to keep kids hanging in there. But we will not be able to tolerate people that put other people at risk. So whether it's bringing someone to an isolation room, to an office, to have a conversation, to have a parent, in worst case scenario, have to come and get the student and bring them home if they're willing to comply. We will explore all options with respect to that, knowing that the goal is not to keep people out of school, but to have people in school. So if we're working with a discipline situation like that, we have a code of conduct, we have parameters around that. We'll try to be consistent and transparent about our approach and make sure that the students know what to expect, parents know what to expect, and that we've checked our legal pieces to keep ourselves above board.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think a lot of the conversations amongst our task forces and admin teams have really been around proactively teaching practices to protect ourselves and others, and that it really needs to be a community approach. So, some ideas that came up is, the high school team talked about creating videos to model some best practices in terms of risk mitigation strategies. Our elementary schools have talked about, rollouts in the way that they do for social emotional learning and speaking with respect. It's another element and an extension of creating community at our elementary schools. So I know that they've already started to develop plans to teach students these protocols and these routines in a way that's positive and through community building, so that we're all in it together and we're all here to support one another and protect one another as well. So, that's been a common topic of conversation, less on the side of punitive, although we know we will have to explore that, but to try to do it in a proactive way so that it's positive.
In some ways, it does build on the social emotional learning pieces that have been worked on over the last couple of years and builds on the whole relationship piece.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple questions. If you register for one option, fully remote versus blended, are you able to switch in the middle of the trimester?
Not in the middle of the trimester. So we have said at the middle school and elementary levels, it would be at the end of trimester 1, we would have that opportunity for students to shift if they choose. And at the high school, it would be the semester break is what we are looking at.
Okay.
That makes sense because that coincides with the end of the grading period for each of those grade levels.
Will students on IEPs have live remote services on remote days?
Susan, are you? Yeah.
Sure. We are working on many plans for students. At this point, it's very general, but it is something that we are looking into and considering.
Okay. It's been confirmed that multiple surveys went out to the same home. How can the numbers be viewed as remotely accurate? We were aware that had happened. Those numbers are not binding. That survey was not binding. There will be a subsequent letter that goes out to parents requesting, Sandy, maybe you can speak to this, commit to one or the other options.
Sorry,
Right.
I'll ask Dr. Cochran to jump in as well, but yeah, that was a plan to get some tentative data to look at the feasibility of a potential remote return. We understand the complexities and the issues that came about with that because we didn't ask for a commitment. We're looking at doing that very soon, but in a more secure manner. That would require families to log in with the email that they have on file through the registration process. So I don't know if Dr. Cochran, if you want to speak at all to that as well. But.
There were two parallel processes. One, to get a general idea of the percentage of students whose parents would be putting them in fully remote. And the other was to try and identify employees across the entire spectrum of our roughly 680, 690 employees who may be medically compromised and be eligible for accommodations per federal laws, including the Family First Coronavirus Act. And so by having those two pieces of information, one of the major things we're looking for would be what would be the percentage of employees or percentage of teachers and paras in particular who might be compromised and not be able to work face-to-face, and would that number or percentage be lower than those interested in online teaching, so we could ensure that all of our vulnerable people, paras and teachers, could teach in that environment. And so we had enough information that I think we're looking at pretty safe numbers in that regard. So while the number may have been skewed up and down, it's roughly, last time I saw it, 27.1, 27.2% remote. And the percentage of people who self-reported that they may qualify was significantly lower than that. So we do get in rougher terms the information that we needed, and that is there a good ratio between those two things for us to be able to move forward and plan, and there is.
Okay, thank you. In researching available space for social distancing, did you consider the gyms, the cafeteria as classroom space?
Yeah, definitely. That's part of our ongoing planning, but yes. So early on in our planning, our school admin teams measured, in collaborating with our facilities department, but measured every classroom space in addition to the Performing Arts Center at the middle school, to our gymnasiums, to our cafeterias, the mini gym at the high school, libraries. We looked at every possible space in our buildings to accommodate our larger groups. Dawn, were you going to jump in as well?
Yeah, we've looked at using the cafeteria for classes, but also for studies. Depends on what we have as a challenge in terms of the size of the classes that we need to relocate in order to have all the students that are enrolled have safe distancing. So until we have our numbers, we don't know the exact need or how we will use those rooms. But we have some things that can help us in terms of space. We might be able to have students who don't have a period one on the first period on any given day, not come in if they had a study scheduled. If they chose, they could come in later. And same thing with a student who had one the last period of the day. And that would grant us a little bit more opportunity to be using classrooms that would otherwise be used that way. We might be able to consolidate some studies or move studies to the cafeteria and have more kids in one spot, monitor differently, save some staff to be able to cover for other needs in the building. We see that we're gonna have to be very creative and fluid in the way we deal with things, depending on numbers right from the get-go, and dealing with any particular unexpected challenge that comes up if we have people absent, especially if we have staff missing. So, but we have a pretty good idea of the capacity of every room, and we're working on how to furnish them to get as many people safely into them as possible.
The staffing and scheduling, especially at the high school level, is going to require pretty advanced calculus. It's a tremendous challenge. It's going to be very time consuming. We're going to try and get the survey information and the registration information back from parents as soon as possible. And I think, Don, that we can agree that we'll probably not have schedules out to people in the timelines that we would like, but we'll be getting those done ASAP so we can inform students and inform parents of what classes we were able to get into. And then you go through the whole regular cycle. It'll just be compressed time-wise. People have been putting in tremendous hours to try and get us started in this direction, and I'm just very appreciative of all the hard work. The paras, the teachers, the other employees, the parents who've invested time in the committees and helped out has been tremendous. And then once we get our numbers, then the schools will have to dig in again and put in some long hours to make this work for kids, so that we can start when we're intending.
Students are currently scheduled, but they're scheduled based on what we had hoped to be able to do as far as bringing everyone in. That will change as people's priorities get announced, and then as their choices, because there are a lot of changes that go on. A week from now, the guidance counselor will be in working with families that are making changes in their schedule for a variety of reasons. Their focus has changed, their direction and their goals have changed, and courses need to change. So that always happens. It's a very busy time. We bring the counselors in early to handle that. So that will happen the same way. But hopefully we'll have more information about the specific numbers, and that will even help us more. So I think we have a plan to work on it, and we're going to be racing the clock to be ready to go. But the sooner we have the numbers, the better off we'll be.
Okay, another question. Staff surveys were sent out regarding medical waivers and filing for the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and they may not reflect the actual data. Also, CDC continues to update its information, and we have staff that have teachers and other teachers in other districts that are still waiting on their districts to announce plans. So they may not know yet if they need to file for the Families First Act. How is Timberlane going to be able to handle a possible last-minute increase in staffing needing to work remotely?
Well, quite honestly, the sooner we know, the better. All we can do is schedule based on what we know, and we're going to have to move forward. If someone is concerned that they may be eligible, but they will not know, I would suggest that they get a hold of HR, give that information. It will be confidential. That's why we're going through HR. And the more notice that we can have for this, the better. Documentation, in most cases, will be required. So please give us as much lead time as we can. We can only make this work if we have as much information up front as possible. And we know that if we don't have, healthy teachers, then we can't provide the services we want to provide. So we're trying to do the best job we can to look after all of our employees. And we're just hoping that you can help us get that done up front to help the schools get their ducks in a row in order to open up on time.
Great, thank you. Back to the IEP question. For students with full-time paraprofessional support, are approaches being put in place to support these students? ESY was an improvement, but when your student needs full-time support to navigate their learning, that's a significant challenge. Working with your case manager is not the answer. These at-risk students need learning that's accessible.
So first and foremost, oh, go ahead, Dr. Cochran, if you want.
No, why don't you go first, and then I'll follow up about the other piece.
Okay, so in terms of any dissatisfaction that you have, we are always trying to improve the service delivery that we provide. I really would encourage parents that have feedback to provide to do it with the teams, because you're part of that team and you're valued members of what this child needs. You work closely with them. I think that if there is feedback that you'd like to give me, certainly send me an email. And we would absolutely respond with some pieces. But the team meeting and putting the information into an educational plan is really where it starts. And I think that that's the best way that I can answer that. We are making changes. And I spoke to some of them. We're also working very closely with our counselors, social workers, school psychologists, to make sure that children have a smooth transition through this next year. Whereas last year we worked on a lot of pieces where we were living from a 2-week span of time. So I encourage you to send me an email with things that you want me to consider, and then also speak with the teams, because I really think it takes a village to accurately provide effective instruction for all of our children on special education plans.
I referenced earlier that I'd already reached out to the representative for the TTA and the TSSU, and that the first meeting is scheduled for Monday. We're in the process of trying to set some timelines and determine what are some of the first priorities, and the area of special education is one of the ones that is at or near the very top of our list. So I'm just hoping they can move this forward expeditiously.
I think that last year in the spring, we recognized the true value of our paras, because they're so important to the daily functioning of students that need very close attention. So while we really want to make sure that they have an opportunity to work with those students, we have to double down on our ability to keep them safe. So, we're going to have to take a look at making sure they have the protective equipment they need, just like they were if they were a nurse. If they're working with a student and they're doing close physical work, depending on the student's needs, those things will vary. So we have some work to do to figure that out and making sure that we can guarantee them that they have every bit of support in keeping them able to work and stay healthy.
Thank you. Another question, will full-day kindergarten students be paying the same tuition even though I now need to take 3 days off of work to assist their learning?
Dr. Cochran, did you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So in our tuition courses, our 3-year-olds who come to school for 2 half days, they will remain coming to school for 2 half days. The only change to our 3-year-old program is that we do offer peer partners at TLC. Those students typically stay full days some of the week, and we are looking to move them back to just joining a class for half days in order. Right now, they would cross cohorts. They would cross teachers, they would cross students, and with our cohort model, we're trying to reduce that. At our 4-year-old program, similar, our 4-year-olds come for 4 half days. They will be receiving 2 in-school days and 2 remote days. Again, peer partners, same thing. We're looking to move them to just half days. As far as kindergarten is concerned, our half-day program will continue to run on a 5 half-day week, and that is a free program. Our full day is a tuition program. Our full day, we expect to be able to provide 5 full days of instruction for kindergarten. So at this point, as of today, that tuition is still the same. The students will have their teacher 5 days of the week. Our 3-year-old tuition for a half day for those peer partners who we're asking to change is $1,100. And our 4-year-olds who we are looking to change, I believe is 22. I need to look that up. Too many numbers in my head.
This week, over the last week, I learned way more about the mechanics of scheduling and billing around early childhood than I ever expected to in my entire career. Lucy gave me 2 crash courses, and I understand most of it. So I'm just glad she's there doing this work.
Thank you. Will families be able to decide what cohort to go with to accommodate work schedules? Like say a Monday, Tuesday versus a Thursday, Friday?
We haven't really discussed it, but I think within our ability to do so, I think it's to our advantage to do that. I'm not sure logistically where it ranks in terms of the priority system, because it's going to cut across, especially at the high school level, course selection. So Don or anybody from high school guidance want to jump in on that?
Yeah, we have not had too much at the high school in terms of questions along those lines, but there've been many middle school and elementary situations. Where we get it is when we have people that are in multiple schools. So if I have a high school student that's providing support after school or during school, if they are going to be home remote the same day as a younger sibling, they might be actually babysitting them for that period of time. So there will be situations like that come our way. Luckily, families generally are going to, if they're living in the same residence, are going to, if they're the same level, they're probably going to be at the same time. But school to school, it might get missed. So we would need that information up front to be able to be successful in aligning those things. But if they're on the same bus, that would probably be where we could do that. And I know that Mr. Pedersen did work on a split with buses that looked pretty even to us. So That would nip a lot of it in the bud, at least for families.
We
spoke
understand
a lot about this afternoon, and we kind of came to the point of we have to put families first, right? And where in elementary, where you might have 2 teachers at a grade level, only 1 teacher is teaching on that cohort. So if 8 kids in the neighborhood all need to be with that 1 teacher, that may move our numbers to an unmanageable way. So we spoke this afternoon about really focusing on families first, making sure they're either in the same cohort or not in the same cohort, as Sandy said, because we have received those requests. And then from there, then we can start looking at neighborhood requests, you know, and other requests like that, and we will accommodate as best as we can. The smaller schools are definitely going to have a harder time with that because there's not a lot of flexibility between one or the other.
Thank you. The question is, what is the district going to do to help families with children that struggle with remote learning so that they do not fall behind? So, some students just don't do well with the computer-based learning.
No, at the high school, we talked a little bit about why we would want to have some time beginning, end of the day, you know, for parents to access teachers to kind of communicate those issues and to strategize with them. If they're special education students, then they would have the support of the team that's working with them in that regard. But there will be kids that slip through the cracks if we don't have opportunities, and time set aside while we have teachers at the school, you know, to be able to have conversations and to then find time to work with students if they can.
On a related topic, we actually discussed today how we're going to have to change our attendance policies so we get accurate attendance in place. And one of the main reasons for that is that, as Dawn mentioned, we had students who basically drifted away from school in the spring. And it's not a Timberlane issue, it was a statewide issue. And so the first step in trying to respond to those students who are drifting away is to know whether or not they're attending. So we will be taking teachers will be taking daily attendance based on a set of criteria that we're going to have to develop that will reflect their engagement in their assignments, their completion of assignments, and their participation in online and remote environments. So the first step is finding a way to do that that's actually accurate and doable, and then using that information to determine which students we have to try and find and support and pull them back in under our roof.
Can I just add one thing to that support piece that Mr. Woodworth mentioned as well? At the middle school, we're looking at still incorporating an advisory model. That was something that could have been improved upon in the spring. So we're also looking at building those small group communities as well to help peer interaction and also, you know, provide students with a person that they can go to should they need advice on where to connect. I think in the spring, our teachers did a great job communicating with school counselors and with building administration. We called home, we connected with family, we emailed, you know, we did all of those things. But like Dr. Cochran said, consistent attendance will help. It'll help us know, you know, where to focus our efforts. But at the middle school, we're going to reincorporate our advisory program, whether we're hybrid or remote.
Similarly, at the high school, we have a team of teachers who had put together our advisory program last summer and in the spring prior to that. And now they're going to get together again to see how we can use that to also, you know, kind of restore some communication with students, get them more connected to the school after a difficult spring.
Okay, thank you. This is a special ed question. Preschool, pre-kindergarten teachers fulfill multiple roles as special educators, regular educators, case managers for the grade. The concern is there will not be enough time to provide services to children who have IEPs when you're dividing children into cohorts and reduce time in person. How will the TLC program run? Other districts have opted to only service children with special needs during certain phases of reopenings in order to make it more equitable for the children with the highest needs. Is Timberlane considering doing this?
I can answer that, Dr. Farrer. We're looking at many options, including outside vendors, inside options. And all of the options are really contingent upon our CDC pieces. But again, I encourage those of you that are watching, if you have ideas that you feel are appropriate, please send them on to us. But we haven't really taken anything off the table as we move forward regarding instruction for students on IEPs.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up for that is, how will the district use paraeducators to assist students during remote learning?
That's part of the MAU negotiations that start next week. It is, from my perspective, one of the most important parts of the conversations. Those community members and teachers and administrators who sat in our Zoom meetings, know that paraeducators are very disappointed that they didn't get a chance to support their students in perhaps the extent or the way that they would have liked, and that for us is one of the conversations that we've had the most thought and talk about. And the next step, as I say, starts next Monday. But it is, if it's not the highest priority for me, it's very, very close to it. It's crucial that we get support to our most vulnerable learners, and something we have to get everything, bring everything to bear to try and make this happen, doing it in a way that is safe and equitable and meets all necessary requirements. And that's the problem. There's conflicting interpretations of some of the regulations, and those, like I say, those conversations to try and sort this out and do a significantly better job with that this fall will start in earnest next Monday.
Okay, what will lunch look like?
So the expectation is, this is Jeff Dowd, the expectation is that students would be going from their classrooms to the cafeteria, socially distancing, and picking up their lunch offerings. The lunch offerings would be curtailed to some degree. We may, for example, not have a salad bar option. We likely would have more grab and go options for the students, and they would return to the classrooms to eat their lunch. The question came up earlier as to whether we had considered the use of the cafeteria for classroom space, and even though the cafeteria would not be used for the typical lunch rounds that we would still have a lot of traffic going through that area, in that room, that space, for students getting their lunches and being able to socially distance while doing so. We do intend on exploring options for a Wednesday, which would be the off day for Wednesday lunch service, and service for students on their off remote days as well.
Speaking with John Fratello, he had been networking and coming up with strategies that could have pretty ready, easily picked up meals in the cafeteria that didn't demand a lot of close work between the cafeteria workers and the students, a safe way for them to get their meals. We do have a pretty good sized cafeteria. We will have, if we are there in half or less than half of our students at a time, an opportunity to spread out pretty well. Depending on weather and things like that, we have courtyards, we have outside areas that we can bring people to eat. So we could do a pickup, bring the meal somewhere else type of thing. We'll be creative with it to try to take advantage of every opportunity to get kids to have a meal in a comfortable spot in a timely fashion.
I think it's important to note that we're also keeping into account allergies, both staff and student, food allergies and sensitivities. And additionally, we have to keep in mind our CBA in terms of coverage for lunches and duties, and if those are in a classroom and what that looks like. So those are all things on our planning radar as we look at what lunch in the classroom might look like.
Okay, thank you. Will students or staff be asked to get COVID testing before starting school? I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no.
No, not at this point, no.
Okay.
We've had no conversations about that.
We haven't, and we talked about CDC. The CDC does not recommend screening as students come into the building, so that hasn't been addressed either. Another question is if a student tests positive for COVID, does the entire class get quarantined? Or other question is, if a student is ill without COVID, do all the students and the siblings need to stay home?
Do you want me to
I
answer?
think- Well, let me speak to it first, and then you can chime in and round out my question or nicely contradict me if that's where you're going. Practice in the spring really was that take a look at contact tracing, trying to determine on a day-to-day basis with Health and Human Services. We had nurses making phone calls, following up. So as much as possible, we're relying on the guidance and the instruction related to Department of Health and Safety, Health and Human Services rather. And but other than that, we will be expecting to put some protocols in place. Exactly what, I don't think we've discussed in any great detail thus far.
I can add to that our nurses have looked at isolation locations in every building and exactly where they'll be. And as Dr. Cochran had said, we're working on the process and procedures that will align with that.
Dr. Farah, can I just briefly follow up on the question prior to this one around screening? So I've seen also in the questions coming in, questions around why the schools are not screening. CDC guidelines don't recommend, in fact, advise against a school screening. That being said, we plan to have screening questions. And the expectation through CDC guidelines is that families are monitoring those symptoms and going through those screening questions on a regular basis. So we'll be developing protocols that we share with families, and we'll have to work in partnership with those families when their students are coming to school around that process. But it is guidance that's been given schools through the CDC. So we are not actively doing it on site, but there will be a screening process, and we'll be relying on families to work with us collaboratively to make that happen to ensure the safety of all people in our buildings.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of time and effort early was into the whole screening thing. A lot of school districts went ahead and bought some very expensive and fancy devices for taking temperature, only to find out that they're by and large not at the level of accuracy that we need. They has some false positives and miss some negatives. And the other thing is, and once the weather gets cold, these machines basically read the ambient temperature of your skin, which if the day is hot, your temperature reads higher, and if the day is cold, your temperature, you'd have to be inside for, the estimate is 15 minutes before you would actually get an accurate reading on anything that's a thermal scan. And so the thought of trying to take all of the students trying to get into the high school or the middle school and holding them somewhere for 15 minutes while their body temperature is reflected in their skin temperature makes it, not doable. But we do have to work with parents to try and get them to screen and to get them to take that screening seriously. We will be giving PD for teachers and all professionals in terms of how to look for symptoms of COVID and other illnesses that would trigger the move to the isolation room. And we have to be really diligent about that. We have to err on the side of caution. If a child is warm, if any coughing occurs, then we need to know about that and follow up on it and take the appropriate steps.
Okay, thank you. How will it be handled with a child that is going to have to be in daycare that may not provide a computer to that particular student? I think this would be Mr. Henderson.
I apologize. I was just reading a question in the form at the same time. Can you repeat the question, Kim?
If a parent is not able to stay at home and they're working and their child is in daycare and that daycare can't provide a computer, how would that be handled?
Well, it's fully the intention of the district to give every student in the district a device, an age-appropriate device. As we've talked about in previous board meetings, we talked about preschoolers and pre-kindergarten getting tablets, rugged tablets that they'll be able to use, and these look like mini iPads. Kindergarten students will get touch Chromebooks that, as the name alludes, it would indicate the screen is touchable and can be manipulated. Grades 1 through 12 will get standard Chromebooks. As we've talked about in the past couple meetings and in the task force, we're having some extreme shipping delays because of COVID for the regular and touchscreen Chromebooks. It's entirely possible we don't start the year with them. If that's the case, we're going to have to go back to what we did in the spring, which was have parents augment their devices. However, what we did put out last spring, if you recall, is we did offer for any parents, students that needed a device to let us know, and we had Chromebook pickup events. So if it dictates that we need to do that again, we will certainly do that and make sure every student that needs a device will get one.
Okay, thank you. This is a kindergarten question. Is the kindergarten half-day program hybrid 2 days at school and 3 days remote as well?
Yes.
That's a yes, okay. A question on how will the special ed learning center time at the high school be provided for a student who chooses remote learning?
Sorry, I had a little trouble with my mute. We're still discussing those pieces. We are also looking at using learning centers more effectively and addressing our students' individual needs and review of coursework to support the scaffolding that they need in order to access the curriculum. So those are pieces that we continue to work on and improve upon from our spring and early summer experience.
Okay, thank you. Will all students be able to access the class lesson at a later time if they are unable to commit to being online during the proposed school hours in both models? For various reasons, sickness, parents need to work, older students working, that it may not be possible to commit to being online at that time.
Well, it would be an expectation of teachers to make assignments available one way or another. If we knew a student was going to be out, we could work to make it available one way or another. But most of our teachers are posting their assignments.
Okay, so for students that are remote only, is there an expectation that teachers will be delivering those synchronously, but also taping those?
No, there are specific things that prohibit, video recording and audio recording without the express consent of all participants. So, that is something we would need to work out with our legal team around the RSAs that prohibit that and FERPA regulations. So, there's more to that question that we would need to work through. But we've had those conversations regarding, situations will arise that we're well aware of where some students, whether they are sick, have conflicts at home during the day, may or may not be able to tune in when direct instruction is occurring. So, we're working on that, but that being said, we cannot just systematically pre-record all lessons without some pretty strict guidelines in place and agreements in place, honestly.
Okay, thank you. If a child shows symptoms or is out sick for any reason, will testing be mandatory before they return to school? And if a student is ill, will remote learning be available?
Yes, we'll have to take every situation will have to be handled, individually, because students may present with similar symptoms, but be suffering from different illnesses, and it's a complex situation. So I think we'll have to rely on medical advice. If those families are consulting their physicians, we'll default to that. That being said, it would absolutely be our intent to provide remote learning if possible for those students while they are out. They may be ill when they are at home. And so we would work with those students to get them caught up, but we absolutely hope to provide options for students when they are in those situations.
Thank you. Do we know if Timberlane will still proctor the SAT on site for seniors?
Dawn, I'm not sure recently with regard to the scheduling of it on site. We know that the state has provided 2 different dates for the fall for our rising seniors to take that exam. In terms of scheduling, I would want to connect with Mr. Children and his counseling staff for the date that's been selected and how that will work with the hybrid model. But Don, I don't know if you have any more updates from what I have.
We've been getting a lot of communication from the testing service, and we've been pushing that to Mr. Chulgin. We're looking at going with a later date for testing, the options that we have, but we want to make sure that we have ourselves ready for testing in a safe way.
Okay, thank you. Will there still be before and after school care?
So we've been having those conversations with regard to outside providers using our facilities. We actually spoke a couple of days ago with Dr. Cochran about that. In some of our elementary schools, we have programs in place with the community Y. So we're having conversations around that as we speak. I think it may have actually been yesterday that we were actively talking about that and how we could possibly make that happen, in addition to reaching out to other community organizations to see how we can support families in that way. So Dr. Cochran, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just that we've thrown it around as an idea. We know the stressors that families are under with everything that's going on. And so the more that we can do, the more we can put in play to try and support them and give them options, the better. So all we had talked about initially was, how was it that we can work with some models that are existing and expand them. So at this point in time, this is mostly something that we're planning to work on, but quite honestly, I would say given the 4 to 5 hours a day that we're involved in meetings and then writing after that, we may have to push it back closer to the actual start date. We'll also have a lot more definitive information once we get a final approval on the model, but it is something that we're very cognizant of, the stresses that families are under, especially all parents are working with children of different ages. So it's on our radar. We'll try to reach out to some agencies. We're anticipating that it would be a user pay system in virtually all cases that we're aware of. But if we can coordinate location, space, busing, time, those sorts of things to try and make it work for families, then I think that's something we need to try and do.
Okay, thank you. Do you plan on installing more sinks or having more hand washing so students can wash their hands more often or disinfect?
So I can speak to that. There is no plan in place to put in more sinks, but we have put up hand sanitizer stations in the hallways that in the past we haven't had. We also have many options in the elementary school for hand washing. A lot of those classrooms have sinks in them. We've supplied extra soap dispensers in those rooms. So those will be filled daily, checked daily. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay, thank you. Will the district be keeping the class size limits for remote cohorts?
I didn't quite catch that, Kim. You were breaking up.
I'm sorry, will the district be keeping the class size limits for remote cohorts?
Good question. We'd like to. We just don't know if it's viable at this point. And it may vary significantly from level to level. In doing the calculations, once we have the survey, or sorry, the reports back from teachers and about who's available to do online or not, whether we lose teachers, all of those things are factors. I would be surprised if we were able to go from now till Christmas and not have some issues, quite honestly. We're doing the very best we can to make sure that we're not going to have people impacted at work. But, children attending school elsewhere might cause parents to be out, and that's not only allowable under FMLA, but under Families First and a bunch of other things. So if we run into staffing situations, we'll have to respond as best we can and as fairly as we can. Quite honestly, we have been trying to staff up a little bit and see what we can do in terms of bringing in and getting long-term subs to commit. We've had some preliminary conversations with the board about that. We discussed it with Dr. Farah, who was seeming very supportive, and we'll reach out to make sure that all of the board is aware of what we're looking to do. But the reality is, and I think I've said this in other venues, we're short in this country about 250,000 certified teachers. That means that everybody who's certified and qualified out there is pretty much employed, as are people who may be uncertified. We have very high numbers around New Hampshire of teachers who are working on alternative plans. There's a real dearth of substitutes. And so we're going to try and work with our people to try and lock as many in as we can. There may be some cost to that, but we know that, with the teacher numbers that we have a consistent need for substitutes, but that is an issue. Is it likely to impact some classes and groups more than others? Yes. How that plays out with the calculus is not known at this point in time, but that we do expect at times that we're going to have some inequities, quite honestly. If you just look at the odds of it, we know we can get a relatively balanced start, but after that, there are so many factors that we don't control that, we'll do the best that we can to make it the best learning environment that we can. But there's some things like illnesses that we can't control. And it may not even be an illness of the teacher themselves or the parent themselves.
Okay, thank you. We have about 10 minutes here before we wrap this up, and I know there are people that are seeing the questions. Did anybody want to, and hang on, let me minimize my questions. Did anybody want to jump in on some questions that I haven't asked yet that you would have a burning desire to answer?
I would just like to, because we have people that are concerned that we're not taking advantage of technology well enough, and that our instruction isn't as teacher directed as it could be or hasn't been over time. But teachers have a lot of flexibility in how to use technology to make learning exciting, and they can record themselves. They can do a lot of things. They can't record students. They can tape themselves. They can introduce films. They can do a lot of different things to provide very stimulating online delivery. So I don't feel like when we talk about being synchronous, we're maybe communicating it well enough, but we can have interaction between students and teachers online. What we can't be doing is recording students online. And that's a distinction that's there to protect students' rights. And that's a district policy that we respect and understand. And the last thing you want to have is something that can have a life of its own, that is an errant comment or an embarrassing situation that makes a student have to have a stigma coming to school that lasts way too long and impacts their learning. So those are protections that are we owe to students. So when we're a bit conservative about this, it's out of respect for our kids and for the law.
Thank you. Did anybody else have, Sean?
Sorry, I was muted. Is it my understanding that the only limitation that we have right now is the 6-foot distancing to meet the CDC guidelines that prevents full 5 days? Is that a correct statement? We meet all the other metrics.
No.
So somebody want to jump in on that?
I believe that we may, because we
It's
have.
either a yes or no, Dr. Cochran. I mean, either we meet its guidelines today. We've already talked about the 0.033, and from the literature that was provided, we meet that. The only thing I can think of is the 6 feet number, and is that the limiting factor?
No.
It may be. I can't verify that at this point in time, but
Okay.
that may be true.
My question would be is for the facilities aspect of it, what would be the minimum distance that they could require or work with such that all students could come back? Are we at 5.8 average? Are we at 4.2 average? So that we can understand how close are we to getting full school for our students. And then the other question I have would be, with the metrics that we're utilizing, you know what? I'll come back after another round of questions. I want to get this one right. I'm sorry.
I can address a little bit about that, Sean. We have some classrooms that we right now would normally have, say, 20, up to 25 perhaps students in, that are only going to fit by CDC guidelines 8, 9 students. So when you start to say, well, what will that be with 5 or 4 or 3? We can do the math on that, but it doesn't help us coming back full, because you're not going to be able to get the same number of kids that we have enrolled in some classes in those classes. So there has to be, some protective type of piece there to think about.
I do understand that, but a lot of that has to do with the number of students that are going to be doing remote, because that load is then taken off of the ones that want to come into the school, so that there's a less of a load. So you're not talking 100% of the population, you're talking a subset of that.
Right.
And districts are coming to different decisions. If you look at the age of the buildings, newer buildings usually have larger classrooms because the standards have changed over time. So it's the size of the building, the size of the classrooms. There's a whole bunch of things that factor into a particular school or particular district's ability to do this. In order to bring them all back, you're either going to have to violate CDC guidelines or have all very new buildings with, a lot of extra spaces that you can utilize. And we're not, in terms of our physical plant, we're not in that situation.
Well, what I worry about is having a metric that is never going to be obtainable, and it's always going to be that carrot that we're all, as a society of Timberlane, trying to approach, but yet it's that holy grail that we will never ever see and obtain. That's what I want to worry about.
I think you made your point, and that will be discussed more at the board meeting on Thursday as we look to approve the plan. Those metrics were just built today, so there's still some room for taking a look at that. I just wanted to try to wrap up too. Sarah?
I just had a question, maybe Mr. Woodworth can answer. With the juniors and seniors that would typically be provided parking spaces and allowed to drive to school, and a lot of them carpool, what are going to be the regulations or rules or expectations around parking and students driving each other?
Well, we're looking at an increased opportunity to have more students drive, and we'll take a look at that kind of going in order of age. So seniors would still have their spots. but we're looking at maybe not even having parking spots for the rest, depending on what we know as far as the capacity. We'll take a look at how many people have licenses, how many people want to drive, and we'll go through a process of opening that up. I think will help us a great deal, especially when we have concerns about how many kids we can fit on buses. So it will help us and it will help students, and we will just be more concerned about young drivers and their ability to handle that responsibility.
So I want to wrap this up because I did promise that we would close at 9. Board members, you'll have opportunities on Thursday to ask more questions. There are a lot of questions that we were not able to answer. We have captured those, Mr. Henderson, right? Yes, he's nodding his head.
Correct.
And so the staff will continue to work to answer those questions, and we are continuing to work to try to hammer out the details of the remote learning. There will be another school board meeting on Thursday that will be remote. We do hope to get back to regular live sessions on the following week when the PAC is available. I thank everybody who participated and all the staff who spent the evening with us, and keep your questions coming, and we will do our best to answer them. Thank you very much.